So here we are, Dr. Robert Sands, back for another great chat. We're both chomping at the bit to get on with it. And our conversation today kind of comes on the back of something we were talking about when we were talking about inappropriate sexual behavior and people who don't quite know how to act in certain ways, and wonderful insight into behaviors in massage therapy rooms and all that kind of stuff. And we were talking afterwards, and you came up with some great words that I just thought we've got to carry on with this, because you came up with a word that I really liked, and you're so right how it's on kind of on the up. And I think it's very much to do with the seemingly more depraved way that society seems to be going. And the word that you came up with yourself is normophobia. And it really makes sense. And in almost like the same sentence or the sentence afterwards, you were talking about polymorphous perversions, and they totally go together, don't they? They totally are. They support each other, don't they? So can you talk a little bit about what normophobia is and polymorphous perversions, and then we'll kind of we'll go on about how this affects relationships, people, self-esteem, marriages and expectations and all that kind of stuff. So, but let's start with those two words.
All right. Well, norms are the bedrock of civilization. So if you have societal attitudes towards norms that they're bad or somehow causing pain or discrimination to people that are non-normative. Non-normative is a commonly used term, but normative people fall in the bell-shaped curve, or whatever way you want to look at them, into kind of the middle group, and they need to be the majority. So norms are majority, and norms come from developmental lines of children growing and getting normalized. So everybody's not normal, so we do tolerate non-normative, but it's new in the history of civilization that organized groups want to disrupt or degrade norms in order to enhance their non-normativity. So if you're in a non-normative group, let's say sexually, homosexuality, now called gay, is not normative. It's probably 5, some people say 10% of the population. And there's a lot of tolerance for non-normative people. But now the normative people are being made to feel wrong and bad for wanting norms and protecting and propagating norms in child rearing and family life and in social intercourse, you might say, kind of bumping it towards the social intercourse is talking. So if you read the old British novels, they talked about social intercourse all the time. And if you were a kid, you thought, oh gosh, intercourse. So I'm saying that normative, if we don't protect our norms and we don't have a method of being proud of the norm and grateful for the norm, the civilization will, I don't know if it'll dissolve, but it will degrade. It will degrade into non-normative dominance, where non-normative people feel superior, they shame normative people, and they want to impose or propagate their ideas of, for example, sexual behavior. It's not just sexual, but sexual behavior into youth. It's called sexualizing youth, or intruding their agenda into the youth and family program. Let me stop there on that. I don't know. Polymorphous perverse is another topic, really, but it is related.
Well, it is related, and I think it's really interesting because I was going to say to you, what happens when in a society when the non-normative becomes the dominant kind of, but you kind of answered it. It just causes like a breakdown, if you like. I kind of see it as a chaos, just a chaos where normal values that we were brought up with cease to exist and cease to have any kind of clout, if you like, in society, in schools, in, you know, with the police. I mean, you look at what's happened in, say, America, where you had last year or the year before, I can't remember, people asking for the police to be defunded. And I just remember thinking, why would anyone not want a police force? You know, my mind just couldn't comprehend why you wouldn't want a police force. And then you see what goes on in some of these cities now, where people are just going into stores, ransacking and looting and just walking out, and no one's doing anything. There's no police, there's no anything. Now that's just at this moment. What happens, Dr. Robert Sands, 10 years down the line, if that keeps going, 5 years down the line, a year down the line, where I mean, where do you see that going?
Well, I mean, it's not going very well. And I don't think it'll continue because the normies, let's call them normies, the general population who are busy having their lives, maybe not calculating what's going on from a graph or a trend of behavior presented by a TV commentator, they're going to be affected by it and will rise up. This is the old phrase, the center will hold, comes from the belief that the normative people who are busy with the important tasks of life, not the tasks of self-entertainment necessarily or hedonism, but the tasks of work and raising families and making sure that children are protected from deviant intrusion. The intrusion, deviants frequently, not all, but frequently want to propagate their idea of sexuality and behavior into normative children. So they move into the educational system, and there's currently a intellectual battle about that, having to do with education. What is the purpose of education? Comprehensive sexuality education is the document that summarizes the effort to bring ideological deviancy into education at an early age under the guise of being liberal and thinking that parents don't really know what they're doing and that teachers need to be instructed on what to introduce. The example you gave comes from a book that's a part of the comprehensive sexuality education platform that shows in pictorial form how children can give fellatio and other sex acts. In other words, it's working from the premise that all kids need to be sexualized so that they can discover their propensities. And this is non-normative. Normative children and normative people don't want that. They someday will rise up against it. I think it's happening. But right now, the normative people seem to feel inhibited or guilty or, oh gosh, I don't want to speak up, or that doesn't seem right to me. There was an example of a gay man who was the head of Teenage Cosmopolitan magazine, who was promoting that all girls need to have anal sex. And the parents rose up and he was fired. He was removed because he was promoting a deviant sexual practice. Not that it's necessarily uncommon, but it is non-normative. It's non-normative. And so there is evidence that parents will react if certain things happen. For example, teaching kids to do fellatio under the desk in kindergarten is an outrage. I think it's child abuse, and it's actionable. In previous generations, the police would be called and the kids would be transported for intervention and assessment.
Yeah, totally. So just to clarify, what Bob and I were talking about was a recent article that came out that a 5-year-old girl was found to be giving, as a lovely word that you use there, fellatio to another boy in the class, and the teacher was in the classroom. And you know, I sometimes read this stuff and I just kind of, it overwhelms me, the badness of it, that this child even knows what fellatio is at the age of 5. But what it takes me onto, and what I wanted to really explore, the psychology of this. And I've always thought that in a society where you have been able to get free hardcore pornography for decades now on the internet, so any 10-year-old boy or girl can access pornography, and pornography has kind of evolved into this monstrosity of perversion. And you know, where in schools, if they were teaching sacred sexuality, the bond of intimacy, the bond of sacred, you know, kind of love between people, and how that leads to sexuality, it's a very different thing. But this the psychology of being exposed to pornography at whatever age, and now you've got parents who've got children who were exposed to pornography. And what I'm interested in is the psychology of those parents who, you know, have been brought up with this, and now are these the parents that are looking at these kids and going, well, they need. I saw that the WEF, I think it was a WF, was saying how children need to learn about, you know, quite intense sexual things as early as possible. Now, of course, the idea is that, you know, the world is run by pedophiles, and all they're trying to do is normalize pedophilia, one of the most heinous crimes for all time. In my lifetime, it's the most heinous crime. Rape and pedophilia is just like the most disgusting, obviously depraved, demonic thing. Tell me what is going on psychologically with the world and this acceptance of or you know, this numbing to this type of terrible stuff. Why do you think? Who and why and what, and anything you can say?
Oh gosh. So pedophilia is a manifestation of one of the polymorphous. Perverse is a word that came from many forms of perversion, and it was invented during a time when norms were established. And so a perversion was a deviancy from a norm, let's say in the sexual area, that was judged. I mean, it's a judgmental term, polymorphous, many forms of perversity. The word perversion is not a compliment. So if you're a pervert, it used to be that the society would assert itself by saying no perverts allowed, and perversion was debated. And then I think, I don't know, this is a large question. The 60s came along and it was sort of anything goes. Whatever you want to do is fine. You don't need to respect authority, well, the police authority or the parental authority, or even maybe the authority of your own wishes. That's a real problem when kids are seduced or groomed into doing things that they would not naturally do. Normative behavior is derived from biology and normative development, not where kids can be taught to do anything that the adult wants. I mean, kids are not naturally easily perverted. They resist it. I worked for 15 years in a child sexual abuse clinic where we heard case after case after case that was so disturbing. And many of these perpetrators were just simply pedophilic psychopaths that wanted to exploit children under the guise of they wanted it. And all the kids really, they didn't know what to do other than that they wanted affection. That was frequently a way of seducing a child, is offering them affection and closeness and then turning it into a sexual exploitation.
Wow.
So the role of pornography is a very huge topic. It really desensitizes and degrades the human dimension. It makes it more objective. You become caught up with images rather than people, and it actually causes impotence in men. There's a huge upsurge in male impotence in young men who normally are not impotent, but they're so desensitized and they don't know how to relate because they've been perverted. There's that word again. They've been perverted by the image of sexuality as something that's exploitive, aggressive, even sadistic, all of which prevents them from having a normal relationship that begins with hello, who are you, and so forth, that is called intimacy. So I think you're right, but the culture is kind of off and running. Nobody really knows how to intervene on a cultural a runaway train, pornography.
Well, I did see something the other day, and it was figures about homeschooling in the 1970s and in 2022, I think it was. And I think homeschooling is definitely got to go on the rise. If you want to, I mean, I've just, what you just said there about how children are looking for affection and attention, and that's how demonic, perverted psychopaths get their way in. I mean, just for you to say that, and any parent watching this, you know, it's such a simple thing, but if a child feels neglected, I saw a series of documentaries, this is a few years ago, and it was about people living on the streets. I can't remember what city it was in America, and how they have, you know, the prostitution thing was just massive. And they were interviewing, they took these prostitutes in, and a lot of them were transgender prostitutes, and they took them in and they interviewed them and really got their life story, and were saying, okay, how have you ended up here? What's your path to this point? And every single one of them had traumatic childhood, exploitive, sexual, terrible parents who actually sometimes even encouraged, you know, almost pimp their own children out, that kind of stuff. It was so heart-wrenching, and it almost, it's like it takes you into another part of parenting. It's like, should people actually have a license to parent? Should people actually have to go through some kind of, you know, rigorous course to learn how to parent? That you can't, that, you know, it's like, how do people get so twisted to do that to their own kids? Do you believe in licensing parents?
Well, of course, one of the rationales for the comprehensive sexuality education program is the premise that the parents are not doing the job of educating the child about a variety of dimensions. Sexuality is one of them. There's other that are called social emotional learning. So the premise is that parents are inadequate. But I don't want the state taking over parenting through using the educational system to advance dogma, or whether it's perverted dogma or norm. If anything, they should be promoting norms and protection of norms, protection of children, giving children a chance at, sometimes it's called innocence, or in psychiatry, we call it the latency period, or the period of non-sexuality. Obviously, that can be shattered with abuse and inappropriate exposure. But if you protect norms, kids grow up without being sexualized, and they have a chance at discovering relationship before they become pubescent and eroticized, where all they think about is having sex, and they haven't even learned how to relate yet. So it's a tricky game, and I don't know about a license. I'm not sure what more to say other than I don't want the state running all the child care.
Yeah, it's true. It's just like someone, maybe just they have to go on a course just about nutrition and affection and emotional stability and being role models for children. And I mean, I came across an old thing that happened in Britain many years ago, about 20 years ago, where this family who were in quite a low-income area of England, this woman had decided that if she pretended that her child had been kidnapped, she'd get a big load of cash. And so she basically locked her child up with the perverted uncle under a bed for about 5 weeks, and she was tethered around the waist, so she couldn't really go anywhere. And I just like think, how do people just get so far away from a loving, tender mother, a loving, tender father? You know, someone who just wants to, you know, I just don't understand why people have kids when they haven't got the ability. And why don't people kind of, you know, this whole thing that we've said all along about truth, saying truth. It's quite interesting that you could say to someone, look, you're not emotionally equipped to have a child. You're really not emotionally equipped. You can't stop people having kids, but surely there should be something in place. What actually I've got written in front of me, because I wanted to ask you, because it's about relationships, but a little bit off what we're talking about, is this thing. Years ago, swinging was all the rage. I don't know how on earth it goes now, but you know, I lived in a city where evidently there was a big swinging scene and everybody knew everyone was swinging and all this, and saw a few documentaries on that, and this whole thing about people saying you have to have a really powerful, really good relationship to swing. It's a sign of a grounded, really functional relationship. And I remember sitting there thinking, am I nuts? Do I think that a kind of, you know, that going along to a swinging club with an evident partner and watching them have sex with lots of other people, does that make me, you know, the weird one for not wanting to do that? But the people who are doing that are the normies.
Right.
I mean, the social engineering. Again, I think the social engineering that goes into that, like, oh, these people they've got such a great relationship because they're going into swinging clubs and watching everyone have sex with their wife or their husband or whatever. Oh, how does that psychology, is it a weak mind that just takes on that stupid idea, or is it me?
Well, I mean, of course, you're a normie. You're just another pathetic normie that is judging these people who want to do what they want. It's really the manifestation of narcissism or extreme self-centeredness and hedonism. Hedonism is the pursuit of what you want to do when you want to do it, and you have no boundaries. You have no adult saying, no, that's not smart. You have encouragement. In fact, I can remember back in the 70s in my child psychiatry training, some of the psychiatrists were, and I'll say they were all gay, and they went to these Wesson oil parties, and they made fun of those of us who were not interested in cavorting. And they all died of AIDS, I must say, all of them. They all died of AIDS, which is a sad and natural consequence. So I think the normies need to be proud of their norms. You're speaking with disbelief. You're saying, how can this be? Where do these people come from? Well, there's all sorts of people. And there are definitely people that should not be parents. Yeah, but they're biologically procreating. And so in my field, we used to talk about the good enough mother. What is we can't be too demanding of our mothers or they'll all be wrong. It's like we're making all the mothers wrong. You got to do this, you got to do that. And then you have this generation of over anxious parents thinking, oh my gosh, I'm wrong. The poor baby, poor baby. We've got to do this, we've got to do that, rather than coming from confidence and having it been modeled for you by your own mother. This is where we get our mothering and our fathering is from our parents through identification, not lectures or classes, but that you remember how you were parented and you carry that in you as an identification, not a cognitive lecture about what to do. And so it's a big question how to support norms, how to support parents who are being made fun of for not allowing their children they object to their child being encouraged to give fellatio under the desk at school, like you're a hoity-toity or some of these judgmental terms that. So I think we need normophobes are deviancy promoters. They want to promote their own subgroup so they feel less estranged or less different. They really want to be normies, but they don't want to actually identify with the norm. So that's why I thought the term norm, there's all these phobes, Islamophobe and transphobe and homophobe. Well, what about normophobe? Let's defend the norms. It's time for the normies to stand up and say enough is enough.
Totally. And what you said there about parenting is it goes both ways, doesn't it? Because when you've got good parents, whatever that means,
good enough.
Yeah, good enough. And then you've got the fractured parents. And so if you've got children watching that fractured role model of anything, and then it perpetuates, it just keeps perpetuating until someone somewhere decides to put their foot down and they don't want to perpetuate the behavior. And I think it's a basic psychological approach, isn't it? That when people come and see you, I know I've said to my clients before, and they go on about, say, a parent, and I go, well, are you doing everything you can not to be like that parent that you despise? Are you making the effort to go, I'm not going to talk to anyone like that, or especially my kids or whatever. I am making a conscious effort not to be like that. That parent taught me how I don't want to be. Because it's kind of surely everyone gets to the point where you go, well, I don't want to be like that. I loathe that. I do not want to be like that. And do you find that? Do you find that in your field?
Oh, yes. Most parents who have their own children work hard to not repeat what they experience. And often they'll overcompensate. And so if they were from a very highly structured family, very controlling, then they frequently they go the other way and they don't want to impose any limits. And so it's a cycle of learning that where parents carry within them their own child. I mean, they were a child and they still have those memories and those habits. And so their goodwill, their love really tries to guide us into doing non-harm. You know, we don't want to harm. We want to protect. And I'm looking at the time clock here. So yes, the parenting is a huge issue of intergenerational struggle, improvement. Hopefully each generation improves. I think there's less and less child abuse. I am discouraged by the shaming of norms and the abandonment of norms. I think that it's and the promoting of either bizarre or deviant views of human nature and sexuality that have no basis to be defended or promoted. Why are they being promoted, and why aren't the normative people saying, look, we understand you want this, but no, it's not going to be here in our schools. And I believe that that is a trend that will be increasing.
And when you've got ideas like from, I can't remember if it's the United Nations or the World Economic Forum about sexuality, you think, oh, that is a big problem. Because do you remember, this is what I remember about being taught about sex when I was young. You know, it was the classic thing at school. You had these drawings on the board of, you know, when a man loves a woman, you know, and they kiss, you know, it all started with when a man loves a woman. And there was a very clinical kind of thing about him getting an erection and how pleasurable it felt for the woman. They never ever talked about orgasm for women, though. It always used to irk me. You know, not obviously when I was a kid, but when I look back on it, it's like, why did they never talk about female orgasm? It's all about when the man gets an erection and then all the sperm comes out. It's like, where's the middle bit? Where's the kind of woman's bit? But it's like, I'm sure, and I had my parents, my mother sat me down and talked about the birds and the bees. She explained sexuality to me, and it was based in love and respect and time, and you know, it was so different. And I'm sure, you know, you've got children, I'm sure you had to sit down with your boys and go, okay, son, when a man loves a woman, you know, it's like, you know, you must have had those chats with your kids, did you?
Well, I mean, some of it's by chat and some of it's by catching them on the verge. And of course, in the old days, and I've tried to convince teenage girls in my office to postpone their acting out of a variety of behaviors, not just sex, but a variety. In other words, don't act out your experimental fantasies. Just hold on. But it's a very hard sell in a culture that says you should try everything.
Absolutely.
You don't hold back. Don't be inhibited. Act it out. Discover yourself by doing everything without realizing the kind of wool you're gathering with these harmful relationships. Absolutely. They're exploitive, they're immature, there's a lot of abandonment, there's not a discovery of human connection and affection that is kind of ideal. I guess we're talking about an idealism that we want our children to be surrounded by love and affection as a primary, and that the sexuality is the icing on the cake. But of course, young people are highly sexed and they're not very developed in their relationship capacities. That's why there's all this talk about objectification, that boys, when they get their erections, are obsessed with the act, and they frequently don't even know the girl. You know, they want to jump. They just want to go. So that the culture needs to design methods to inhibit, and mature culture, normative culture, does have chaperones or adults that are discouraging premature or inappropriate sexuality. Although those people are being defeated in kindergarten because of the promoting of sexuality. So good luck.
Surely it's only going to lead to poor self-esteem, lack of confidence, feeling of you know, personal degradation, all that kind of stuff. And when people grow up and they start to look back at what they've done and, you know, whatever, then it doesn't do anyone any favors, does it? When you look back, and people don't realize this when they're young, but, you know, when you get to a point where you can look back and laugh about, you know, your first sexual fumblings, but they were healthy, you know, you were 16 years of age, you know, you weren't 10 or 5. So it's really down to, again, the normies standing up, parents putting very kind of you know, normative values around sexuality and obviously other areas of life. But we were talking about sexuality and the terrible effect of pornography and the whole thing. But we're out of time, Bob. I've been hanging on your every word, as always. And it's so interesting. It is so you take your brilliance for granted, but I'm just like hanging on all those fantastic insights and ideas. So I'm just having a quick look.
It's not brilliance, it's education about human development and how we grow. And at each stage, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, how can we protect norms or values, what are the values that we want to promote and protect, and what are the intrusions, the dangerous intrusions by wrongdoers. I mean, what do we want to call them? Wrongdoers?
Non-normatives.
Non-normative.
That's a very polite word. I could think of other things, but you always up the kind of level of kindness and understanding and spirituality. So thank you so much. And that was superb. The time has flown, and I really look forward to our next chat and getting into that wonderful mind of yours and seeing what we can pull out and all that fantasticness. So thank you very much, Dr. Robert Sands.
Okay.
See you again soon.